All right, well, thank you very much, Paul. I'll try to speak up, but I tend not to like to stand behind the podium. So if I step away and you can't hear me, please throw up a hand or something. Really, this is a very exciting product for me personally. I really have always found the statistical analysis work that really makes up kind of the very, very tip of business intelligence as being very high value and unfortunately very underutilized. So if I could get real quick a raise of hands, does anybody in here have SAP Predictive Analysis up and running or even testing, or have you even looked at it at your various companies? Has anyone even looked at it? Okay, so we have somebody who's taking a look at it. Good. Does anyone have any other analytical software, advanced analytical software like SAS or SPSS or any of those kind of applications running? Okay, so a handful of people. If you think about that for a second, if you look at this contingent of companies, and you're really only talking about 3 or 4 people that have really even touched into this advanced analytics, that tells you how greenfield this particular area is for us. So it really is kind of exciting. That being said, it's not greenfield from the technology standpoint, it's greenfield from the interest standpoint. However, thanks to the great wave of big data, this has really changed. So as we go through this, I want everyone to think, when you hear the words big data, that means advanced analytics, okay? Big data just means pulling the data into a pile. You can't analyze that in traditional means. You have to use these advanced analytical tools to take advantage of them. So when all the marketing people and everyone gets excited about big data, ultimately this is the direction that they need to go. And this is SAP's entry into this landscape. When I say entry, they actually had some products before that I'll mention in a second here, but this is really their a new application that they've developed, and really there's a lot of very interesting and new things that they've presented to us. Real quick on the agenda, we're going to run through a quick introduction of both the application as well as what the use cases look like. Talk a little bit about the landscape, some of the basic concepts, the development status of the program itself. As Paul mentioned earlier, this is brand new. It actually went general availability, in February, I believe. So it's really, really a new product, kind of give you a feeling for where they're at and where they're going. Talk a little bit about the workflow and methodology, how the actual application works. And then we'll do a use case and demo. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and go through the introduction. Hi, I'm Ethan. For those of you who are interested in knowing about me, come catch me after the break, because you're all here to talk about SAP Predictive Analysis. It was at one point called Predictive Analytics, so if I confuse the terms, I apologize, but the official name is SAP Predictive Analysis. It is the latest iteration of advanced analytical tools, and it replaces in the Business Objects stack an application called Business Objects Predictive Workbench. Did anybody ever use that application? There's a reason. It wasn't very good. It wasn't actually that bad, but the problem was it was nothing more than a wrapper around the IBM SPSS application. So a lot of people saw it as, hey, great, why don't we just buy IBM, the SPSS, which really was fairly vendor neutral. So this is actually their first entry into this space with their own homegrown application. As far as the competition, it's trying to go head-to-head with applications such as Minitab, SAS, and SPSS. The truth is that it probably is pretty close to Minitab and SPSS right now, or at least pretty darn close. And it's not quite to SAS yet, but it will get there eventually. If anyone's familiar with SAS, it's a full robust environment that not just has the analytical side, but has a full dashboarding suite as well as reports, etc. So this is, again, kind of filling a hole within the landscape of the SAP Business Objects environment. One last thing on there is it's competing with the Excel usage. I'm going to kind of get your brains back a few decades, or a few years anyway. Does anyone remember when Excelsius first came out? What did Excelsius replace? Excel. I mean, a lot of what Excelsius was built for was to replace the concepts and the business activity in Excel. And really a lot of advanced analytics are being done today also in Excel. So this is really an attempt to steal some of that market. And as we go through, you'll maybe get a better understanding of why I'm comparing to Excelsius. Real quick on advanced analytics. Anytime you talk about advanced analytics, I think it's useful to talk about what advanced analytics really even is. And I won't read through these entire quotes for you, but a couple of the comments on here that are worth pointing out is large patterns and rules, and that's in the first quote. And really what we need to understand there is that analytics are for interpreting large data sets, okay? They're interpreting fast data sets that change constantly. How do we go in and kind of pull out one value or one kind of interpretation of 100 million records? Very difficult to do. But if you look at people like, oh, I don't know, Amazon, they do that all the time. Every time you click on a screen on Amazon, everything you look at, they're adding to their database and doing analysis with. And this is the kind of tool you have to use in order to do that. Next, this quote for Gartner Group I think is interesting because if I read through it, the first couple of points, discovering correlations, patterns, and trends, again, sounds just to me like a dashboard, right? Except for who does that interpolation and interpolation, two separate words, interpolation meaning to expand beyond, and interpretation meaning to understand. Who does that on a dashboard? Me. This really smart computer right here that has all sorts of biases, lack of understandings, and most importantly, I don't work all the time. I like to take time off. So we use these pattern recognition techniques, statistical and mathematical techniques, in order to automate and do this systemically. All right, so let's talk about some use cases at a real top level. And I broke these up into the categories that the SAP Predictive Analysis tool itself uses. A couple of the use cases including associating and clustering data. Examples would include, what do my customers buy together? If you're a retail store, it's very interesting to know when people buy milk, they buy Oreos. When people buy Oreos, do they buy milk? Well, if they do, where do you think you should stack your Oreos? Has anyone ever been to Fry's and seen the cookie display right next to the milk? It's there. Look. That's not an accident. These are very, very, very sophisticated people that put these things together. And they use this association and clustering type of information. Other examples of clustering and association would mean, if I watch Downton Abbey, what other shows might I be interested in? If I pick Downton Abbey in my Netflix queue, it pops up this list of other titles that you might be interested in. Again, these are the exact same statistical tools that we use here. For your companies, think about this. If you work for a college, I know there's a couple of university people here. If you've taken English 101, what do you think we should be advertising to you? Well, 102 is the obvious one, but is that the right answer? That's what comes into my head, but we can do research and find out what that is. All right, another example, developing forecasts. Again, we all develop forecasts, and how do we normally develop a forecast? The traditional 5% rule. Bump everything up by 5%, and that's what we're going to use as our forecast. Okay? Well, the truth is that's really how we do it, right? Why do we do it that way? Because our brains are not smart enough to pull in 15 or 20 different additional variables that actually contribute to it and then create a proper forecast. Okay? That ability to do what's called regression analysis and time series modeling is built into this tool. Create decision trees and neural networks. This is a really fun area that can kind of get your brain screwed up, especially if you're not a statistician. But what happens in this area is when you have really, really complex relationships that you don't fully understand. Or maybe they don't even exist and you want to understand how real these connections can be. Again, the tools can help outline that for you. Outliers. Again, this is more of an operational type of analysis. If I run a report, or if I pull up a report and I see a value of 13, and I'm normally getting 12s, do I care? It's a good question, isn't it? Does that drive decisions? Does it drive behavior? Well, in order to know that, you need to do the math. You need to do the statistics. And that's what this tool brings to the table. I stole this slide from a couple of SAP presentations. If you ever look at an SAP presentation about predictive analysis, you'll see this slide in here. I totally disagree with it, but I think it's still an interesting visualization. And basically what they're saying is competitive advantage goes up as your analytics matures. And the maturity pattern follows this path of raw data, clean data, standard reports, ad hoc reports in OLAP, generic predictive analysis, modeling, and optimization. And these last three are what is done inside predictive analysis. And the reason why I disagree with it is because that implies that standard reports have less value. I think it's kind of the other way around. Standard reports have a tremendous amount of value. This just hones that edge and gets us a little closer to our final deadline. And as I mentioned earlier, as you guys all pointed out, since we're not exactly overusing these top 3 tools, it's hard to imagine that the lack of their use somehow torpedoes your business intelligence processes. Let me run through a couple of basic concepts and FAQs, and I apologize, I am going a little fast, very much on purpose, because I would like to show you the tool. But if you do have any questions, throw a hand or a water bottle or something and try to get my attention. What's that? Oh, I heard something, so I'm hoping that was a question. No, okay. The first thing that I'd like to point out is that this tool does not require statistical knowledge or understanding. I put a double quotes in there for a very important reason, because interpreting statistical analysis is really not as simple and straightforward as you'd like to think it is. You know, the old expression of liars and statistics, they use each other and vice versa. It really is important to understand that the statistics themselves, just because your model is pumping out a number to you, you need to appreciate and understand what that means, okay? The downside is, of course, now we have to have one more thing we have to explain to management. The upside is that our managers are getting a little more savvy as well. And the other thing is, let's be honest, who in here does not have a director or a VP above them who hasn't asked them about big data? People are interested in this stuff. They know there's value there. We just need to make sure they understand what that value is. The tool itself, Predictive Analysis, is a desktop local installed machine. It is something you have to have on a local machine. You certainly can run it from a server, but ultimately there's no web front end or anything else like that. It is a standalone application. It really can be considered a wrapper program, and usually when we say something's a cobbled together application, it kind of gets a negative tone, and we kind of deride that kind of architecture. But in this case, it's actually a very good model. And as we go through the application, you'll see why they did it. You kind of have this front end that basically just inputs and allows you to do some basic manipulation of your data. Once it's in there, we apply the predictive analysis or the predictive models to the data itself. Now what's cool is that rather than trying to build their own engine or trying to build their own algorithm interpretations, they stole some open source code. Fortunately, it's some really, really well-used open source code. If you have anybody that has come out of university in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, or maybe even longer than that, they at least know about what R is if they've taken any statistics classes. R is a very, very popular open source application. It's unfortunately a scripting application, and it's really, really not user-friendly, but it's very powerful and very succinct. So what they did is they built this application to take advantage of all the huge library of algorithms that sits within R. I think right now there are over 3,500 open source algorithms, and that's going to be a zillion variations of linear regressions that take different stances and different mathematical approaches to it. Every type of example that you can think of, you can just go out there and download it from the R library, including making your own. So there's some real massive flexibility and value in that. So they've really taken advantage of what's becoming a core standard interpretation model for advanced analytics. Finally, for their output and display, rather than build yet another visualization tool, they just tacked on to the visual intelligence application, which SAP already has. For those of you who aren't exposed to it yet, I hate to say it's a poor man's business, poor man's Webby, but it's not too far away from that, I don't think. It's a fairly simple visualization tool, but as it grows, it automatically grows and expands within the scope of the predictive analysis. So again, they took what predictive analysis needs, which is an algorithm engine. They built a front end to pull data into it, and then they tacked on their already built output engine. So it's actually kind of those 3 applications wrapped together. But again, very clean, very neat, but it allows for fairly rapid development. Right now, it really is very much a single user development model. This is not unlike SAS or SPSS, by the way. There really aren't a lot of collaborative predictive analysis tools out there, at least I've never seen one. So it is, again, in that kind of fashion. That being said, they are working on making it more collaborative, so you can share a model. You can already share a model, but as far as sharing a data set and a model at the same time and having someone log into another computer and pull up your model and play with it, none of those things are in existence today, but that is certainly something that's on their development path. There is no SDK. Again, the version that we're on right now that came out on Wednesday, or either Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, was 1.0.10. So we're quite a few versions away from 1.1, unfortunately, but with 1.1 there will be an SDK that's provided for it. Just being a betting man, I would say, again, give you a percentage chance, I would guess that within a couple months we're going to start seeing some applications developed to take advantage of this SDK. One of them that I'd like to get developed on it is InfoBurst. If anyone's ever heard of that application and wants to put in a plug for it, I would love to see InfoBurst built to both schedule and run analyses and algorithms, but also to pull that data out and do some different things with it. So the point is that these things are going to be opened up to the normal SDK, to the, I always forget the name of it, somebody help me out. The SDK that Webby uses, 4.0? No one knows? Okay. Anyway, there's whatever that pack is.
The RESTful?
Yes, the RESTful web services. Yeah, it's going to use the same RESTful web services as they describe it. So when they open up the RESTful web services, again, huge community of people that use these tools, it's going to get beaten up pretty well. And they're not trying to do anything unique, which is kind of cool. All right, real quick on development status. Again, they are doing very much rapid and regular updates. Again, a couple months ago, they were on version 1.0.4. They're already up to 1.0.10. In those iterations, they've really been focusing on adding more visualizations and statistical models and algorithms, and they're growing that considerably. Right now, you can already take an R algorithm and load it into predictive analysis. So any of those 3,500, you can grab one off the shelf today and run it through the system. They're actually taking some of those and actually making them into native algorithms. And they're doing that for a number of reasons. One is simplicity, but also to kind of give you a little bit of code control, so you don't download something off the internet that turns out to have some flaws in it. They're also adding some additional types of modeling, so you can do some of the more advanced statistical analysis.
Ethan?
Yes, sir.
When you say you can load any of the 3,500 models,
Mm-hmm.
do you mean they're not encapsulated already within the package? You'd have to download them off the internet?
Correct. There's a kind of an open source forum called, I think it's R Library or R Plus Library or something like that. And if you go to that, again, it's classic university stuff. You know, we're not talking overly GUI or anything, but you can go through there and find and pull down a specific algorithm you want to use, download it, just load it right in, and apply it to your data sets.
How do you know about when it's upgraded? Did they try and automatically update you? Or?
Yeah, it's kind of like Crystal reports. I don't know if you're familiar with Crystal, but there's a little checkbox that says automatically check for updates. And then you also can lock that out if you so choose. But then you can also go in and do just a help check for updates. So, and then it'll pull down the latest version and automatically, and it'll install it and has an install package and everything else. Okay. A couple of other things. Again, there are some bugs. It's a 1.x application. You know, we shouldn't expect too much from it. So, in all fairness, there are some limitations, and you'll see a couple of them. Some holes that they're very aware of. They have presentations almost weekly in various AZBOCUG and other forums and through the SDN. So they are very much looking for input and feedback. So if you are interested in this tool, I'd very much suggest you get plugged in and make some suggestions. Okay, get that out there. That being said, what's in there is pretty stable. That being said, I've never used it in anger, to steal a phrase from Evan. Evan Davies is one of our consultants. You know, this is an application I've played around with quite a bit, but I've never actually been at a customer site where we've had to solve a problem necessarily. And so I've been, you know, sometimes you just ignore problems and just move on to the next thing. But that being said, again, it is fairly stable, especially for an application this immature. That being said, SAP does have some huge dreams for this. They see this competing head-to-head with SAS. SAS is almost without argument the largest, most detailed system out there for this kind of work. It also has a user base of 35, 40,000 companies out there. They've got the whole SaaS Institute out in North Carolina. They charge, I think it's $500 an hour for their consultants. I mean, these guys are pretty proud of what they have. SAP sees themselves being able to come in and just undercut SaaS at the knees. And if they can do it right, they're going to make a lot of money. And so certainly this is going to be a place to watch going forward. They also see it very much as a sales tool for the H word. I don't even like to use the word anymore because I get tired of hearing it. For those of you who want to hear what it is, they can ask a salesperson. I'm not a sales guy. I can be rude. But really, again, it goes back to the question of why would you spend $1 zillion on H and moving all your stuff over if you can't do something with it? And predictive analysis answers that question. Rather than just saying, hey, we can run our web reports faster. Okay? So, what's the real value here? And the answer is, if you have a database of, let's say, 200 or 300 million rows in various tables, you're going to have a really hard time running a very large multi-regression analysis on your desktop. So the point is that the H word does come in very handy for those sorts of exercises. So if you are in a large deployment, if you're trying to do massive analyses, then the H word comes in handy here. And again, this does plug directly into the H environment and ecosystem. Let me walk through the workflow real quick. This is just kind of a dumb little example that I put together, but I, again, thought it was kind of interesting to do. Basically, when we start up the application, you start off simply by importing some data. The data, as you can see over here on the left, can come in various data formats and sources, from CSV to freehand SQL. Freehand SQL, by the way, irritating, has to go through a Java ODBC, which is kind of a pain in the rear, but that's doable.
I don't see Beck's query on
You noticed that, did you?
Yeah.
There's a couple of things that you'll notice that you go, I noticed there's something on this there. Yes, they, in my opinion, their answer to you, if you ask about that, is going to be, go to H. Sorry, go to H.
Boom, thank you.
Sorry. Or the answer is, dump it to Excel and pull it into Excel.
And you could use an office analysis for that. Excellent
point. So like I said, there is some growth here. I have not heard about them adding Bex as an import source. I suspect eventually they will have to. But if you notice here, look on the different versions of universes. Does that look odd to anybody else? What does that tell you about this tool? What security does it use? The answer is none, in case you were curious. For those of you keeping score at home, okay? This is outside the ecosystem of the traditional business object enterprise, and Bex for that matter. There is no SAP. This isn't built into the SAP security ecosystem for a reason. Now it's convenient for us because I can install the application today and query my 3.x solution or query my 4.x solution. But what it also means is I can't take advantage of any of those other things, such as pushing back in to my 3.x environment, so that now my visualizations of my analysis can be seen, or the interpretation of the data can be presented in the InfoView space. These are things they promise to add, but again, as far as the roadmap goes, we're really talking about stuff in the 2.x area. So just don't expect them right away. Yes, ma'am?
Where does this fit with their visual intelligence tool?
Yeah, visual intelligence just fits on the back end, actually installs with this application. And so when you do when I say visualization, I'm saying take the data that the predictive analysis tool has generated using R and presenting it in a chart or something. That is through visual intelligence. Okay. Yes, sir?
So just to clarify, whatever you come up with is your output, not going into InfoView. It's just going to be somewhere else.
Not cleanly, but yes, it basically you're generating just files.
Yeah.
So if you want to take that file and dump it in InfoView, and I'll show you an example here where we can actually take the data and dump it back into a database and then build visualizations on top of that, which I think is going to be best practice. Again, that'll have to be something we work with. And at the very end of the slide, I am going to point out that I'm looking for guinea pigs. So if you guys think there's any interest in your areas, let's talk. I mean, seriously, there's going to be some real cool opportunities. Yes, ma'am?
Can any of these processes, like importing data, be automated in this application? or scheduled?
Not yet, which is where InfoBurst comes in handy. Yeah, I specifically asked that question to the lead developer in a example the other day, or in a conference call the other day, and he completely ignored my question. So I don't know why, because I thought it was a pretty valid question, but he kind of skipped it. Was there another question? Yes, ma'am.
With visual intelligence and predictive analysis, you cannot refresh your data. It's a stale data, right? Once you get it from your source, so there is no way.
No, you can refresh the data. Yes, you can.
Automate that, like if you create a report that you can refresh the data source?
Correct. But again, the visual intelligence is just within this little box. So you'd have to re-export the visualization, and as a
re-export, but not on the same data source. You cannot like refresh.
yes, you can refresh. So let's say that I grab my data out of an Excel spreadsheet and I go back in and update that spreadsheet. I can click refresh and it'll pull the data fresh out of that spreadsheet or out of a universe connection or whatever else.
And that's also freehand SQL. Let's say you connect to Oracle or whatever source. You
Correct.
Have the refresh
Yes, ma'am. Yep. I apologize, I'm already out of time, so let me zip through a couple of slides. Am I okay? All right, I know I'm still in Paul's time, which is always a bad thing to do when you got a review coming up here in a month. So everybody say nice things about ETH. He wasn't that boring. All right, last thing here, limited cleansing on import. Again, the cleansing is one area that they're really putting some energy into. The last call I was on, they said that was going to be their big push in the next couple of mini releases because data cleansing is fairly limited. Now, it's not a big deal if you pull in through like a universe, you can put all sorts of filters and stuff on, but you really can't put in like, you know, algorithmic changes. Like if it's a value between here and here, just set it to 0 or anything like that. Or if it's an alpha, set it to 0 because I want to use this column as a measure. Again, you kind of have to do that cleansing offline at this point, in my experience anyway. All right, that process though also comes to this step of called enriching. Enriching basically is we're assigning attributes, creating hierarchies and formulas. The idea here is that if I've identified a spreadsheet, in this case, you can see in this bottom box, you can see, okay, here's the spreadsheet Ethan's bringing in. This is the price of copper futures since 1954, I think, something like that. This is going to be their open, their close, the volume, etc. And so it's going to come in and say, well, what do you want to do with that data? These look like measures, and it's going to guess for you. And then, hey, here's a date. Probably want a date hierarchy on there. If you had a city or a state or a county, what do you think it's going to suggest? Geography stuff. And guess what? Visual intelligence has a nice geography model. So you're able to then take that data, push it right into these very nice visualizations that have maps associated with them, etc. Again, you can see some of the value of incorporating the visual intelligence tool because it really takes advantage of some of that detailed work that they did. Okay, from here, again, the very limited formulas. They do have, as I mentioned earlier, they've promised to do a lot of growth there. They just haven't. And once I've done that, I can get over into this. The next step is to actually put my predictive model together. For those of you who are familiar with the data services environment, this should look very, very, very similar to you because it is. And basically what you do is you pull in these different boxes that will do certain tasks within them. You can link them together. You can have them fork and branch and come back together as needed. Although I haven't come up with a reason to really come back together, but you can do it technically. In this particular example, let me just walk through what I've done. This first little box shows that I have created a data set. This is basically my import job. Next, I'm going to come in and apply an algorithm to it. In this case, I'm going to run a neural network analysis on it. And again, a neural network says, I'm curious if any of these things have anything to do with each other. Does column A and column B and column C, what is their relationship? I don't know, I'm guessing. And the neural network will help me interpret that and understand that. As you can see, I've got a whole bunch of different algorithms here I can apply. Again, the ones with an R in front of them, where do you think they came from? The R library, right? So this should tell you that that's really straightforward. Once you download and put an R library, again, on your local machine, ta-da, it's there, okay? Then I have also said I want to take my data set and I want to dump it someplace. I don't have to do, again, these are all optional steps. In this case, I want to dump it out to a CSV writer. I just want to write it out to a file. And then right here, I also want to dump it out into a database table. Why do you think I want to dump it to a database table? So I can do some additional stuff, some visualizations within my InfoView environment, within some other type of environment here. Notice I can also push it out to the H word. This is where you would pick that up. All right, so once I've run it, again, just to give you some kind of scope of time scale, this particular neural network, I went 5 layers deep. I think the file was an Excel file, had 8 or 9, or no, it wasn't even that many, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 records. It took me approximately 15 to 20 seconds on my machine to run. So it's actually fairly quick. Yes, sir?
What kind of data source is it?
This was just an Excel spreadsheet.
Spreadsheet, okay.
Yeah, I just went online and downloaded a spreadsheet that had, it's amazing what you can find out there. So I ran it. It comes back very quickly. When I run it, one of my options here on this little execute phase is I can say whether or not I want to add my resulting values as a new column or as a fill, which is, again, just 2 options as far as what you want to do with it. I ran it as a new column, and you can see over here on the far right, this column that says predicted values, which is, of course, going to tell me what my algorithm predicted the value would be. And again, this is going to give you my best fit, closest fit, highest, R squared, all that kind of good stuff for this column. Yes, ma'am?
Is there a limitation on the size of the number of rows or columns or anything?
No, it's purely a hardware execution time question. And that's, what, again, where they'll get into the H kind of stuff, like, oh, you want to run a 5 deep neural network on, on 15 billion rows? Yeah, you cannot do that on your machine. But there are no limitations on it. Again, it'll interpret a CSV and just suck it all in. Okay. Yes? Yes, ma'am.
Has anybody asked a question about using this to populate a data warehouse, like SQL Server?
The answer is yes, I asked that question. And the answer I was told was the only way to do it is through this model right here where you put a write out to JDBC. And then it's just going to execute to JDBC. Once you set this up, you have to put in all your credentials for it, and it will load that into a table. You define your schema in this little box right here. It's actually a horribly complex little box, but it seems to have everything in it. I didn't have any JDBC drivers I felt like dealing with, so I didn't set it up. But you set up column by column where you want things to load, and it'll push it in there. Obviously, you're going to have all the normal problems of ETL out of Excel, data matching, kind of all those kind of problems. But again, they're all very solvable. So, thank you. Good question. All right. The other thing you do get, for those of you who are stats heads, you do get this a full page, and if you look over here, you can kind of see what it is. And that's going to be my summary, and that's going to be basically our algorithm is going to kick back a lot of statistical values, not just here's the column of data, but it's also going to tell me how good of a fit the data is, how meaningful it is, all those kind of cool things. Again, I said earlier, you don't have to know statistics to use this, but that page will make no sense otherwise. And likewise, you won't necessarily know what to do with the data without that. Next, we get into visualization. Again, for those of you who are familiar with visual intelligence, this is visual intelligence. It's simply the visual intelligence front end posted on there. I can just drag my metrics and measures over and plot them as I see fit. Next, I go to a share page where I can actually take those visualizations themselves or the data. For some reason, you can't do both at the same time, but you can do one or the other and send them out to various locations, such as a file export, publish to HANA, StreamWorks, Explorer, I said it, or email the visualizations themselves. When you do email the visualizations themselves, it is simply a JPEG. It just says, how big of a JPEG do you want? You give it pixel size, and it spits it out into an email for you. So it's really fairly straightforward, and it does add a little line in there in case you're worried. I just created this with SAP Predictive Analytics. So they make sure they get that little ad in there for you. Yes, sir?
So there's no direct to Webby, but presumably if you went through Explorer, you could then go to Webby.
In theory. The other thing that you could do, again, like I said, I think the best practice is going to be, I'm fairly convinced of this, is this thing right here. You're just going to push it out to a file, push it out to a database table, build a dashboard on top of that or a report on top of that, and then go from there. So it's a pain, and it's so painful, but the SDK comes out in a couple of months. When that happens, all these things are going to change, I think. At least I hope they do. Again, notice anything missing? The answer is Webby is the InfoView environment. the BEX environment, all these things are just not there yet. Again, they are very much planning on adding them. I have a use case example I'm not going to go through because I don't have time, and I want to give Paul at least a few minutes. But I'll just walk you through my example real quick. So I found some data, kind of a cool little example of crickets. Number of chirps per second in temperature. So if I take this data set, what I can actually do is add some extrapolation to it and basically say, well, if I crank my AC down, will they chirp less frequently? It's an interesting question. What if I crank it way up? What will it do? Okay, so this is actually, again, a real life biology experiment that was done. I found it on some University of Wisconsin, I believe. And I run it through this little algorithm.
It's like something Adam would do.
Hey, you know, I should have paid homage. I apologize. I should have. Our cats eating or something. There's so many cool things. But what's really interesting about this, and this is what I was going to point out to you to be careful with the tool, is that statistics doesn't lie, but statisticians do. Because my linear extrapolation, when I go down to 32 degrees, my chirps per minute go down to about 5.6 chirps per minute. Does anybody see any problem with that? What happens to crickets at 32 degrees Fahrenheit? They become cricket sickles. And cricket sickles do not chirp. Okay? So keep that in mind when anytime you think about statistical analysis, is that it doesn't necessarily mean it understands everything. It's interpreting data points. And the fact that crickets don't survive at 32 degrees Fahrenheit is far beyond the ability of this tool or any other to interpret. Okay? So for all of you worried that they're going to, remember I talked about what brain does interpretation in dashboards? This one. In real life, this isn't replacing anybody. It's just giving me some additional tools.
Phoenicians die at 32 degrees as well.
That's true. If you see it at 40 degrees, you see them walking around like Eskimos. So I agree. A couple of real quick things. I'm not going to read through all this. I really want you to think about it within your own space. A couple of examples of what this means. Although we don't care about crickets necessarily, is it interesting to know what the correlation is between SAT score and success? Is it interesting to know what the interpretation is of attendance to classes and success on the job 5 years after in some kind of a survey? These are very important questions that have business value today that this tool can answer for you today. This isn't, we don't have to wait till version 1.1. This can be done right now today. Give me access to your data. Let's sit down and figure it out. Okay? Real quick on the conclusions. Again, a pretty solid tool, all things considered. Very immature still, but quite frankly, there's still value to be obtained. If you have an analytics team or are thinking about developing an analytics team, and I'm talking about the egghead statisticians, you want to have them beat this thing up. You really, really, really do. It's going to be, this is not a tool you just hand to your average user, but I don't think you want to either. I'm not even sure what the pricing is. I'm pretty sure it's a per seat license. But the point is, these are going to be things that you're going to want to consider. The cash cost is going to be immensely cheaper than SaaS, but the business cost is going to be a lot better if it can read right out of your universes, pull data out of reports automatically, etc. There's a tremendous amount of value that you'll find there. Finally, take advantage of the current content and press for your needs. And there is some value here. There is a lot of noise out in the world. If you have any kind of a marketing department, they're probably talking to you every day about, man, we want to go out there and start digging into Twitter feeds. Well, there's no way you're going to dig into Twitter feeds without this tool. Okay? It's just, you're just not going to be able to do it, or without some similar kind of tool, because there's just too much data that's coming across. So that ability to interpret and do analysis of that data, matching, merging, all this stuff fit together is going to be really, really useful. Put it together with the data services tool, put it together with output through Webby, and you got a real winning combination here. So I am excited about the tool. I think there's going to be some value, and now we're looking for people to work with me. All right. Sorry, Paul, I went way, way, way over, but I do appreciate that. Does anybody have any last questions that we can take as a group? Otherwise, I will be available afterwards if my voice holds. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
But you made a couple of very important points. Some of the examples you gave are things that could be solved by traditional business intelligence and don't necessarily need a predictive analysis tool. If you're going to use algorithms, right, from the R library, right, that are going to, work out complex forecasting and so forth. I can understand that, but I get this problem all the time when I see SAP present this. They can't seem to differentiate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I can do that in Web Intelligence. I can do that
Absolutely.
in Excelsius. I can do that in a relational database, right, in a data warehouse today. So I think it's really important that people understand what the real key differentiators are, right? When you start to get into the real predictive part where the tool, is using things like neural networks and so forth in order, right, to do things that you cannot do in traditional BI tools, then the value comes out.
Absolutely. And a good example of that's triple exponential smoothing, okay, which is the classic, for those of you who like stats, that's the classic standard for predictions, right? That's the classic model for going forward in predictions. You can certainly do that in Web Intelligence. I can't imagine how much pain you'd go through to put that together, but you certainly can do it. Yes,
The question will rise here, why they don't add this to Webby? Why they have a different product so they can make it more confusing to the customer? All of that.
Yeah, and that's a
good question.
That's a great question, except the H equation comes into that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good reason that they did it this way.
I think there's two reasons. One is H. The other thing is this came after post-merger, and I think that they were working on it pre-merger. And my guess is that they didn't really think through how could we add this into that ecosystem. It's rather, this is competing against SPSS and SAS. How do they do it? Oh, they're standalone desktop tools. Great, let's go that direction. And then they realized that, hey, we have this advantage of H. Well, let's take the engine and port that into H, which is basically what they did.